India wants a trade deal with the US to keep me happy. Those were the words from Donald Trump. The US president has criticized India yet again for levying high tariffs on products. Speaking to reporters at the press conference to announce a trade deal struck between the US, Mexico and Canada, Trump said that he's not happy with India charging 100% tariffs. He says he's spoken with Prime Minister Modi and he believes that India will reduce tariffs on Harley-Davidson substantially, something which he says has already happened, but more is expected. Listen in.
India, which is the tariff king, they called us and they say, we want to start negotiations immediately. When Bob Lighthizer said, what happened? You would never do this. They said, no, we want to keep your president happy. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? It's true. They have to keep us happy because they understand that we're wise to what's been happening. India charges tariffs of 100%. And then if we want to put a tariff of 25% on, people will call from Congress. But that's not free trade. And I'd look back to people and say, where do these people come from? Where do they come from? So because of the power of tariffs and the power that we have with tariffs, we, in many cases, won't even have to use them. That's how powerful they are and how good they are.
Well, that's President Trump reiterating his angst when it comes to tariffs, accusing India for the first time of being the tariff king. Joining us now to take this discussion forward, Jayant Dasgupta, former Indian ambassador to the World Trade Organization, Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the US, also with us, Singh, former diplomat. Gentlemen and Ms. Shankar, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Mr. Dasgupta, if I could start by asking you, I mean, President Trump has been targeting India specifically, especially on the issue of Harley-Davidson, so that's not new. He's called out India yet again. He brings up Harley-Davidson yet again. But calling India the tariff king, saying that India has reached out to the US and India wants a deal, they want to make me happy, the US president happy. What do you make of this?
I think the first thing is that we have to separate some of the rhetoric from actual facts.
Yes.
The tariffs on Harley-Davidson motorcycles has been one of the issues which President Trump has been raising, I think, quite persistently over the past year or so. Now, that is undoubtedly a high tariff of 100%, but that is across the board, and it is well within our bound tariffs at the WTO. As far as labeling India as tariff kings is concerned, I think if you look at the major US exports, for instance, the US does a lot of exports of natural pearls and gems and other things, which amount to about $3 billion out of $22 billion which they export to India. Now, that is at 10%. If you look at chemicals, that is at 10%. That is, again, more than $1 billion worth. If you look at mineral oil, more than $4 billion out of 22 billion. That's, again, at 10%. So that, you know, all these things taken together, you can't just take an isolated instance of a particular tariff peak and then keep harping about it. The US also has high tariffs in textiles, in leather, in ceramics, and textiles and leather, it goes without saying, these are items of interest to developing countries. And it has maintained very high tariffs on all these items for many, many years. And before that, of course, before the coming into being of the WTO, we had the egregious quota system on textiles, which was a derogation from the GATT principles of liberalization. So this labeling of India as a tariff king, I think, is misplaced, is factually incorrect, and it doesn't need further, I think, elaboration.
I agree with you. It certainly is misplaced, and you're absolutely right. We do need to separate rhetoric from fact, and in this case, a bit of fiction as well. But Ambassador Singh, if I could come to you and you know, picking up on some of the other comments that have come in from President Trump, he does say my relationship with India and Prime Minister Modi is great, and they will start doing a lot. We didn't call them; they called us to make a deal. Can you imagine? Now, this in the context of talks that are currently underway. The USTR officials were here in India just a short while ago. Negotiations are underway. India has now given time till the 2nd of November to thrash out some sort of a breakthrough on the trade front so that we don't impose the retaliatory tariffs. What does this now do in terms of the negotiations that are currently underway? I mean, this does put the Indians in a corner, doesn't it?
You see, Trump, what emerges when you read Bob Woodward's book, Fear, and you see what's going on in White House and what you see externally, he has his own logic. He has his own perception of things. It's not a rule-based world. It's not WTO. It's not based on facts.
Yeah.
I think the duty on Harley-Davidson has been reduced probably to 50%. But India has really got 2.1% of the US imports is what the Indian exports to US constitute. And in any case, out of the trade last year, 126 billion odd dollars, it's a 60-40 divide between goods and services. In services, the shortfall, the deficit is only about $5 billion. And then what he forgets is we bought $13 billion worth of arms over the last 10 years. And in fact, in Bob Woodward's book, Cohen, his economic advisor, is trying to explain to him why he should not go after Korea and the other countries. He says, look, US exports $130 billion worth of agricultural products. And last year they sold $75 billion worth of arms. Now, Trump doesn't take that into account. He simply takes the data which is there and then deconstructs and then goes out on a tangent. So it's not really matched there. And I don't think it gives a good impression for the US president to be condescending and saying they're trying to please me. This is not about pleasing him. This is about following a rule-based thing which is fact-based. And I hope our delegations are not giving him that impression.
We certainly hope so. But Meera Shankar, you know, just to take the point forward, both Jayant Dasgupta and Ambassador Singh in agreement there that we need to separate President Trump's rhetoric from the fact on the ground. I mean, our trade deficit, nothing in comparison to China and the US at about under $30 billion currently. But that apart, I want to take this conversation forward because we've got Vladimir Putin coming into India later this week, the S-400 deal, we've got Iranian sanctions, and there is still no clarity on whether India will be granted a waiver or not come the 4th of November on Iranian imports. You know, in light of what we've seen from President Trump today, what would you take these comments to mean specifically for these two particular issues, Russia and Iran?
Well, firstly, let me just give a general comment. I agree with what the previous participants have said about separating fact from fiction, because according to the WTO, India's MFN average tariffs were about 13.4%, and its trade-weighted average tariffs were 7%. Now, according to Harshvardhan Singh, who was with the WTO, the actual applied rates that India applies are even lower, somewhere between 2.3 and 1.7, because we give a large number of concessions which don't get reflected in the trade data. So I think there's perhaps need for greater transparency about our trade policy so that people understand that it's not high tariffs. The US itself imposes tariffs as high as 350% on agriculture. And in fact, there are a range of products which have tariffs ranging over 100% in agriculture, 55%, 45%. So it's pretty high tariffs that the US has. So this is a kind of selective picking out of one item by President Trump. Secondly, I think, you know, trade negotiations should be based on mutuality. And I think that is what the Indian government has been trying to attempt. But, you know, as KC Singh said, condescension doesn't help in such matters, because we need to look at the facts. We need to separate the truth from rhetoric. I think one issue may be that, you know, with China, the trade war is going ahead without seeming to yield results. So the need for softer targets or softer, you know, trading partners who could be targeted to get results or to show results as President Trump is showing vis-a-vis Mexico and Canada to his constituency. That look, I'm dealing with this in a different way. I am protecting America's interests, and here are all these countries who are accepting what I'm saying because they want to please me. So that's one issue that he's also playing to his constituency with congressional elections coming up in November. Now, as regards Russia and Iran,
he is playing to his domestic constituency.
Yes.
Yes.
So as regards Russia and Iran, I think India is going ahead from all accounts with the S-400 deal. And the US Congress has passed a waiver in principle, which will have to be exercised case by case. So one would hope that better sense would prevail, because it's difficult for India to accept that any other country would have a veto on where it buys its arms from, given that India pays hard cash, even for US weapons. We do not take aid from the United States. We are not a receiver of US military assistance. And if you go back, I think India was earlier dependent on, the erstwhile Soviet Union and then Russia for a large portion of its armaments. And it took a conscious policy that it wanted to diversify sources of supply to strengthen its strategic autonomy, even as it sought to build its own domestic defense base. Now, it's a sad thing that we haven't really proceeded very far with developing our own base, but then to accept only single sources or, any veto on it would upend our entire policy, which began actually with seeking to lessen our dependence on the Soviet Union. But we don't want to replace that with total dependence on any other country. So I think these are factors
You're
that
absolutely right. And if I could,
would need to take into account.
That will have to be considered.
Yeah, as it builds its strategic relationship.
Let me take that point across. Yeah, I agree with you. Let me take that across to Ambassador Singh. Ambassador Singh, especially when it comes to the S-400, as well as Iranian imports, the commentary so far from the US has been, look, we'll be happy to help India and replace that by way of American imports and American defense equipment. But so far, India has said that S-400 is independent of its dealings with America, and we're hoping that we will get a waiver even when it comes to Iranian imports. But in light of what we've heard from President Trump, would you be concerned that that waiver perhaps is today mired in more uncertainty than the last 24 hours?
There's also been some speculation that when they get the waiver, it may in small print say it is contingent on India buying in future only from US or many more weapons from US. I think India will have to, dodge all this. It's a very difficult scenario. We've seen how the Mexicans and the Canadians have handled him. You can't frontally take him on because he lives in a parallel universe. In fact, Cohen in the same book is recounted, Woodward's book, when he's not able to explain to the president that trade deficits do not mean that jobs have gone from America. He simply asked him a question. He says, you live on the 5th Avenue. 10 years ago, when you walked down the avenue, Madison Avenue, what were the shops you saw in America? They were shops selling things. He says, today when you walk down, they're coffee shops or service shops. US economy has moved to the service sector. And therefore, it's not that if you balance the trade, those jobs are coming back, because there'll be automation and different kinds of factories will come. But in his mind, he's somewhere back in the 60s and the 70s. And his base also believes that if you balance the trade, even if you sell 4,000 Harley Davidsons to India, even though they are not selling in America and the rest of the world is not buying them, and when they are not competitive with the higher-end products coming out of Europe or from Japan, he doesn't understand all that. So I think it's a time where you have to dodge him. You can't frontally take him on, and you don't have to be to accept his condescension. But at the same time, just stick to the rules, and that's it, and that's how to deal with him.
Okay, so don't retaliate, try and dodge him. Mr. Dasgupta, I'll end then by asking you about the strategy, because it seems like India has been mindful about launching any kind of a full frontal assault when it comes to President Trump and his trade policies. Even if you look at the 19 items that India has announced for import curbs to try and rein in the current account deficit, you know, the iPhones, etc., which were expected to be on that list, don't make it to that list. Retaliatory tariffs have now been pushed back till the 2nd of November. This is the second or the third time that we've pushed back the date for the retaliatory tariff imposition. So we've been mindful of American sensitivities. What would the approach now be as we proceed with our negotiations?
I think we have to accept that there is a basic asymmetry in our trade relationship. We depend on the US as our biggest market, largest market. The US is not so dependent on exporting to India. As far as services is concerned, especially IT and IT-enabled services, we are also hugely dependent on the US market. So we cannot ignore the US, or we cannot afford to snub them or to take very harsh action against them because of the fear of further retaliation, which will hurt us very badly, especially when we are having a run on the rupee, in the sense that the rupee has been sliding against the dollar. So we can't be foolhardy, and we can't be, ignore these facts. So that is one thing. The second aspect is that we are still trying for a negotiated settlement. And that is why we are, and of course, only about $1.5 billion worth of steel and aluminium are involved in the tariffs that President Trump has imposed. So we want to take action. We want, as a token, as a symbolic gesture. And as far as the import duty raise is concerned on 19 items, that again is symbolic. Because if you look at our import basket, we don't import too many of luxury items. And it is basically items which we need to keep the wheels of our own industry moving. And we can't afford to raise the tariffs on those. And as Ambassador Meera Shankar mentioned a while ago, the effective tariffs, because we have a large amount of imports coming in duty-free, or under one of the subsidized schemes. So the effective duty is only about 3%, as Dr. Harshvardhan Singh, former Deputy Director General of the WTO, has calculated. So the US tariffs which they pay, if you leave aside Harley-Davidson, that should be in the range of, again, 3–4% only. So on that score, I don't think the US has much to, quarrel about or to complain about. There could be stray instances. India could also be raising, issues about leather and textile items, etc. So these are issues which have to be sorted out across the table through negotiations. And we still have hope, and we still have faith that we will be able to sort out our issues through negotiations.
Well, that is the hope at this point in time, but let's see what these comments mean as far as the negotiations that are currently underway, if it changes anything at all. And do remember, we've got Vladimir Putin in India, the S-400 deal going to be inked, and of course, we've got the uncertainty on the Iranian sanctions that's looming large as well. Ambassador Singh, Ms. Shankar and Jayant Dasgupta, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV 18.